Colorado Territory, early spring of 1873, the snow had just melted from the ridges above Willow Creek, and the land below still held the bite of winter in its bones. Rhetta Langley stood in the doorway of what was left of her family's ranch house, wind lifting strands of her dark hair around her face. Smoke still curled from the blackened ruin behind her. The fire had taken everything. Her father's land, the barn her brothers built, the 4 horses they bred for cavalry buyers, all of it ash and no sign of who had done it. Her father's body had been found near the well. Shot. Her older brother, too. The youngest, Warren, had been gone since the week before, off delivering supplies to Fort Garland. Thank God for that. Rhetta had buried them both herself, hands blistered and raw from digging in the frozen earth. She had not cried, not yet. There was too much to do, too much to figure out. But standing there now, with nothing around her but the wind and the stubborn smell of smoke, her knees went soft. She felt hollow. Empty. I would not lean too hard on that post. A man's voice broke through the wind. She turned fast, hand flying to the small pistol at her hip. The man on horseback lifted both hands, reins loose in one. His coat was worn, dust clinging to the hem, and his hat shaded eyes the color of dusk. He was older than her, but not by much, maybe early 30s. His jaw was rough with stubble, and he watched her like a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. I saw the smoke, he said, came from the ridge. Fire's out, she said flatly. Too late. He looked past her to the ruins. You alone, she hesitated. My little brother's not here. The man nodded once. He swung down from the horse, boots crunching on frost-bitten earth. Name's Gideon Lark. I drive cattle out of Trinidad. Was passing through to see a friend near the San Luis Valley. She lowered the pistol but did not holster it. Rhetta Langley. Miss Langley, he said, tipping his head with quiet respect. Did you see who did it? No, she said. They came at night, took the horses, burned the barn and the house, shot my father and brother. He stood silent a moment, then looked out at the blackened fields. You plan on staying here? It's my land, she said. I have nowhere else. Gideon studied her. You got any help coming? No, he looked down, then back up at her. I know what it is to lose everything. I can stay a few days, help you clean up. You should not be out here alone. I do not know you, she said, though her voice had softened. No, he agreed, but I will not take anything from you. I will sleep in the shed, keep my horse tied away from the house. I do not like the idea of you facing this by yourself. Something in his voice made her stop, a steadiness she had not heard in days. She nodded once. All right, she said. 3 days. He gave a short nod, then moved to start clearing the broken boards from the front steps. He did not ask questions. He did not offer false comfort. He just worked. By evening, they had cleared enough space in the shed behind the barn to stack the salvaged tools. Rhetta cooked beans over a small fire, and Gideon offered part of a salted ham from his saddlebag. She accepted. That night she sat by the fire, her coat pulled tight, knees drawn to her chest. Gideon sat a few feet away, whittling a piece of branch. The firelight moved across his face, and his eyes flicked toward her without turning his head. You do not have to talk, he said after a while. But if you need to, I will listen. Rhetta looked at the darkness beyond the fire. They were good men, my father and brother, kind, honest. We worked hard, saved every cent to keep this place running. My mother died when I was little. It was just us. She paused, her throat tight. I was not supposed to survive them. Gideon set the branch down. You did. She looked over at him. Why are you really here? His voice was quiet. I was running from something, thought if I kept moving I would outdistance it, but now. Maybe I was headed here all along. Rhetta looked at him for a long time, then she nodded once before standing and walking into the small cabin they had cleared for her to sleep in. The next morning she woke to the sound of hammering. Gideon had started repairing the fence line. The boards were old, but he nailed them back into place with careful hands. Rhetta joined him with a bucket of nails and a hammer. They worked in silence. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th morning, Warren rode up the trail on a borrowed mule, face pale when he saw the ruins. Rhetta ran to him, held his face in her hands. He cried in her arms. Later, Warren and Gideon sat together near the fire. The boy watched the cowboy with quiet curiosity. He was only 13. You staying? Warren asked. Gideon looked at Rhetta, who stood across the yard, her arms crossed. I was not planning to, he said. Warren looked between them. I hope you do. That night, after Warren fell asleep in the rebuilt bunkhouse, Rhetta walked out to where Gideon stood near the fence. The moon was bright. You could leave, she said. I could, he said. But you are not, she said. He turned to face her. I keep thinking about what you said, that you were not supposed to survive them, but you did. You are still here, and you are stronger than most men I have known. She stepped closer. I do not feel strong, you are, he said. And you should not have to carry all of this alone. Rhetta looked up at him. You said you lost everything too. What happened? He hesitated. Wife died 5 years ago, fever. I tried to fix it, tried to save her, could not. After that, I left the land. Never stayed anywhere too long. Rhetta reached out and laid her hand against his chest. But you stayed here, he covered her hand with his. I do not want to keep running, he said. Not if there is something worth staying for. Her voice was quiet. Is there? He leaned in, their foreheads touching. You, he whispered. You are. Rhetta closed her eyes, and for the first time in days her heart did not ache so sharply. She leaned into him, and he held her arms strong, steady, warm. The fire crackled behind them, and the wind had turned soft. They said nothing more that night. They did not need to. Something had shifted. Something had begun. And neither of them wanted to let it go. Gideon rose before dawn the next morning, the air still holding the hush of first light. Frost clung to the sparse grass beyond the barn's edge, but the wind had quieted for once. He moved carefully so he wouldn't wake Warren, who had taken to sleeping like a stone now that his sister was close. The boy had not spoken much since returning, but he stayed near Rhetta, shadowing her as though afraid she might vanish too. Gideon saddled his mare without a word, then stepped inside the half-rebuilt tack room. Rhetta was already there, wrapping a strip of linen around her hand where a splinter had caught her the day before. You're up early, she said, not turning. He took up a hammer and checked the head. Wanted to get the north gate working again. That hinges near rusted through. She glanced over, eyes thoughtful. You sure you want to keep fixing things that aren't yours? He met her gaze. You keeping a tally? No, she said, tying off the linen. Just trying to understand what kind of man stays when he doesn't have to. Gideon leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. Maybe the kind who's tired of riding past things that need mending. They didn't speak again until the sun cleared the slope. Rhetta walked out to tend the chickens Warren had bartered for at the fort, while Gideon hauled new boards to the gate. The quiet rhythm of work settled between them. Even the land, still scarred and raw, seemed to breathe easier. Late in the afternoon, a rider approached from the west, raising dust along the trail. Gideon saw him first and set down the hammer. A man wearing a worn army coat and carrying a rifle across his saddle pulled up near the windmill. Rhetta came out of the shed, wiping her hands on her skirt. That's Sergeant Tolliver, she said. He knew my pa. The man dismounted stiffly, his eyes scanning the place with a soldier's caution. Miss Langley, he said, tipping his hat. Heard about what happened. Sorry I couldn't come sooner. Trouble down near Costilla's been keeping us tied. She stepped forward. You find who did it? Tolliver shook his head. Tracks were lost past the Rio Canijos. Could be raiders headed south, could be rustlers. Hard to say. He looked at Gideon. You with her? Gideon didn't flinch. I'm helping her rebuild. Tolliver narrowed his eyes, then nodded once. Good, she's owed that much. After the sergeant rode off, Rhetta lingered near the fence. Gideon joined her, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. You ever lose faith in justice? She asked, eyes on the far hills. He looked out with her. Justice is slow, sometimes it never comes, but that doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. She glanced at him, eyes sharp. You believe there's a difference. I have to, he said. If I didn't, I'd be someone else entirely. That night, Warren sat cross-legged by the fire, carving notches into a stick. Rhetta mended a torn sleeve in the rocker by the hearth. Gideon sat nearby, polishing the rifle he'd taken to carrying after discovering wolf tracks near the creek. Ma used to say we were meant to stay put, Warren murmured, not looking up. Said roots were better than wings. Rhetta threaded her needle carefully. She said that before Pa bought this land, Warren nodded. He thought it could be both. Gideon looked between them. You thinking of leaving? Rhetta didn't answer right away. I was that first night, thought maybe I'd take Warren north, but then you stayed. Gideon set the rifle aside. Would you still go if I left tomorrow? She met his eyes. Would you? The fire popped, sending a thin spark into the dark. I've been across most of this territory, he said. Never found a place that felt like it could hold me, not until now. Rhetta's fingers paused on the fabric. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Warren stood and headed toward the bunkhouse. I'll feed the chickens in the morning, he said. They watched him go, his steps quiet but steady. Outside, the wind picked up again, this time softer, like a hand brushing the grass. Rhetta stood and walked to the door. You believe in second chances? She asked without turning. Gideon rose too. I believe in the ones we make for ourselves. She turned then, eyes lit with something gentler than before. Then maybe we ought to start making one. He stepped toward her, slow and certain. Together, Rhetta didn't answer. She reached for his hand and laced her fingers with his. That was answer enough. The hills were turning green again. Not soft spring green, but the hardier color that clung to scrub and pine, the kind that shrugged off snow and came back stronger. Rhetta stood at the edge of the pasture, watching Warren walk the fence line with a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. He didn't need watching, not really, but she still found herself keeping half an eye on him. Behind her, hoofbeats came slow and measured. She didn't turn. You always this quiet in the mornings? Gideon asked, dismounting. I used to be louder, she said. Before, he didn't press her. Just led his horse to the trough and let her drink. The mare had a limp now, favoring her right leg after a sharp rock left her bruised. Gideon tended her himself each morning, gentler than Rhetta would have expected from a man who'd spent years on the move. Had a thought, he said after a moment. There's a man near Lajara who sells seed cheap if you're willing to trade labor. She tilted her head. You offering to work his field? I was thinking we both could, might give us a start on planting. Her brow furrowed. You planning to stay through planting season? He glanced at her, then out toward the distant ridgeline. I was hoping to stay through harvest. She crossed her arms, more to steady the strange warmth in her chest than from the wind. You ever worked a field that wasn't your own? No, he said. But I figure the land doesn't care who your name belongs to, so long as you put your back to it. That night, they sat on the porch, oil lamp between them and the stars stretching wide above. Warren had gone to sleep early after spending the day helping Gideon haul stones from the southern field. Rhetta's hands were sore, but it was the good kind of sore, the kind that reminded her she was building something again. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Gideon leaned back, one leg propped on the railing. Used to think next was just another town, another trail. Now I think it might be a roof that doesn't leak and a stove that burns steady. Her voice was quieter. With someone beside you, he looked at her then, his face lit faint by the lamp. That's the only part I'm sure about. She held his gaze. I don't know how to be anything but what I am. Then that's what I want, he said. Exactly who you are, nothing added. A long silence settled, not heavy, not unsure, just full. We'll need to fence the eastern slope before we plant, she said at last. I already marked the posts, he replied. The next week they rode to Lajara together. The seed man was older, missing most of his teeth, but fair in trade. Gideon helped him split wood while Rhetta counted sacks of barley and beans. They brought home more than they expected, including a half-broke gelding the man couldn't handle. Gideon tossed his rope without hesitation, and Rhetta saw something in him then, not just steadiness, but grit. Something that didn't flinch when things got wild. Back at the ranch, Warren named the horse Hickory and claimed him as his own. Rhetta let him, though she set the rule that Gideon would do the training. Warren didn't argue. One evening, as Rhetta stepped from the garden plot with dirt to her elbows, she found Gideon repairing the porch steps. He'd taken off his coat, and the sleeves of his shirt were rolled to the elbow. Sweat darkened the fabric across his back. You don't have to fix everything at once, she said, wiping her brow. I know, he said, but I like the sound of your boots hitting solid wood. She sat beside him, watching the sun sink low behind the peaks. When I was little, I used to think the sky ended at those mountains, that if you rode far enough, you'd fall off the world. And now, Now I think the world's bigger than I ever imagined, and maybe not all of it's meant to be seen." He turned toward her. "Would you want to?" "If you could, I used to," she said. "But lately I've been wondering if the best parts are the ones you stay put for." Gideon reached out, brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. She didn't pull away. "I want to build something with you, Rhetta, not just this ranch." "A life." Her throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "I want that too." He leaned in, and her breath caught not from surprise, but from the way everything felt so quiet, like the world had paused to let them find each other. When he kissed her, it was slow, sure, like planting roots deep in soil that had once been scorched but now promised green. The wind stirred the pine above them, and for the first time in months, Rhetta felt something settle deep in her chest. It was peace, and it was hers. The barley had begun to sprout in neat rows, pale green against the dark earth. Rhetta knelt in the field just after dawn, fingers sifting through the soil around one of the shoots, checking for pests. The land was holding. That was something. Behind her, Gideon stepped through the gate with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. His shirt was damp from creek water. He'd taken the mare down to soak her leg again, and his boots were caked from the walk back across the pasture. He stopped beside her without speaking and crouched low, brushing a hand over the young grain. "You ever planted before?" she asked, not looking up. "No," he said, "but I've watched enough men do it wrong to know when it's being done right." Rhetta rose, brushing her palms on her skirt. "It's coming in slow, but it's coming." They walked back toward the house together. A windmill creaked in the distance, and the hens made soft, clucking sounds from the coop as Warren shoveled feed into their trough. His sleeves were rolled and his cheeks flushed with sun. He gave a wave without stopping. Inside, the cabin smelled of warm bread. Rhetta had started baking again, not every day, but when the flour allowed. The old oven still leaned a little to the left, making the loaves rise lopsided, but no one minded. Gideon leaned his hip against the table, watching her slice a heel from the loaf. "You always this quiet when you're content?" she asked, handing him the piece. He chewed, then swallowed. "I was thinking about the fence along the creek. It'll need raising if we put cattle in there." "We don't have cattle," she reminded him. "Not yet," he said. She turned to face him fully. "You planning to trade for stock?" He nodded. "There's a man in Del Norte, German fellow, raises hardy longhorns, says they winter better than most. He's looking for help branding next week, said he might part with a pair if I give him 3 days' work." Her eyes narrowed. "That's a long ride." "I'd leave tomorrow," he said. "Be back before the week's out." It was the first time he'd mentioned leaving, even for a short while. The idea sat uneasy in her chest, though she couldn't say why. "You don't have to barter for us," she said, quieter now. "I know," he said, "but I want to." She leaned back against the stove, arms crossed. "I got used to not expecting anyone to come back." "Not after they said they would." He stepped closer. "I'm not them." "I know," she said, "but it's still in me, that waiting." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "Found this in the tack room." "Your father's handwriting." She unfolded it, eyes scanning the faded ink. It was a list: names, numbers, a few locations. Her jaw tightened. "Those are the men he sold horses to," she said. "He kept meaning to follow up, make sure they paid what they promised." Gideon tapped one of the names. "This one, Harlan Cotter, I've heard of him, runs a freight outfit near Alamosa. You think your father ever got payment?" She shook her head. "If he did, I never saw it." Gideon took the paper back, folding it carefully. "I'll stop there on my way back." "Ask around." A silence stretched between them, then Rhetta stepped forward, reaching for his hand. "Don't spend all your strength looking out for us," she said. "You're allowed to keep some for yourself." He looked down at her hand in his, then met her eyes. "I never had a place where using my strength felt like it meant something, until now." She pressed her palm flat against his chest. "I'll hold the rest down till you get back." That night, after Warren had gone to bed and the sky had turned in Kai, they sat on the porch with a blanket draped across both their shoulders. Rhetta leaned against Gideon's side, her head tucked beneath his chin. He traced slow circles along the back of her hand with his thumb. "You think you'll always want a ranch?" she asked, voice low. "I don't know," he said, "but I know I'll always want you." She didn't answer, just tilted her face up and kissed him once, slow and certain. In the morning, Gideon packed light. Warren handed him a strip of dried venison wrapped in cloth. Just in case, the boy said. Gideon nodded, tying it to his saddle. You keep your sister out of trouble till I get back. Warren raised one brow. Other way around, probably. Rhetta stood back from them both, arms wrapped around herself. The wind picked up, colder than the morning sun suggested. Gideon mounted, gave her one last look, then rode out without a word. She didn't call after him. Just watched until the dust from his horse faded into the hills. And then she went back to work, because the barley still needed tending, because the chickens still needed feeding, because the ranch she never expected to keep was hers again, this time with someone worth waiting for. By the time Gideon returned, the grass along the creek had thickened and Rhetta had finished digging a root cellar beside the cabin. The sun was higher now, days stretching longer, and Warren had begun pulling his weight like a man grown hauling water, checking traps, helping Rhetta without being asked. Rhetta was in the barn when she heard hoofbeats. She leaned her pitchfork against the wall and stepped outside, brushing her hands down the front of her skirt. Gideon rode up slow, a canvas sack tied behind his saddle and dust on his face. His eyes met hers across the yard. I brought you something, he said as he dismounted. I didn't ask for anything, she said, though her voice had softened. No, he said, untying the sack, but I figure you'd make better use of it than I would. He handed her a wrapped bundle. Inside were 2 iron hinges, a spool of twine, and a folded oilskin pouch filled with coin. She looked up sharply. You didn't steal this, did you? I collected it, he said. From Cotter. Turns out your father's name still meant something. Took some convincing, but he paid what he owed. She ran her fingers over the edge of the pouch. You said you'd just ask around. I did, he said. And when he tried to put me off, I told him what happened here last winter, reminded him what a man's word is worth. She looked at him for a long while, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. He held her without saying a word, his chin resting lightly on her hair. When she pulled back, she said, We'll use it to buy cattle, maybe a plow team if the price is fair. He nodded. I already spoke to the German in Del Norte. He's holding 2 longhorns for us, hardy ones. Us, she said. He held her gaze. Unless you've changed your mind. I haven't, she said. That night they sat outside long after Warren had gone to sleep. A pair of owls called low from the cottonwoods near the edge of the pasture. Rhetta pulled her shawl tighter and Gideon draped his coat over her shoulders without asking. I keep thinking about what it means to belong somewhere, she said. Before, I thought it meant not leaving, but now I think it's more about who stays. Gideon watched the stars. I spent years not belonging anywhere, never thought I'd find a place that would have me. You didn't find it, she said. You built it. He turned to her, quiet for a moment. I was thinking maybe we should mark the land proper. File the deed under both our names. You want to be on paper, she asked, one brow raised. I want to be beside you, he said. In every way. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Then we'll ride into Canijos together. I'll sign it with you. They married in late July under the cottonwoods by the creek. The preacher from the settlement rode out with his wife and a tin box of hymnals. Warren stood tall beside Rhetta, his hair combed and his boots polished with axle grease. Gideon wore a clean shirt and the same coat he'd arrived in, its sleeves patched and worn, but whole. Afterward, they shared bread and stew with the neighbors who'd come to celebrate. The sound of laughter drifted across the field, and the cattle load from the new pen Gideon had finished just the week before. Later, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and the guests had gone, Rhetta and Gideon walked the edge of the pasture in silence. The sky was streaked with the last light of day and the scent of crushed grass rose beneath their steps. You afraid? Gideon asked softly. Of what? Of this? Of what comes next? She stopped walking and looked out across the land. Not anymore. He reached for her hand. You were the first thing that felt like home, she turned to him, and you were the first man I ever trusted to stay. They kissed beneath the first stars, the air warm and still, the future wide open before them. Years passed. The ranch grew. Warren took to breaking horses like he was born to it, and by the time he turned 18, he ran the southern pasture on his own. Rhetta kept the books and raised a garden that fed half the valley. Gideon built a second barn and a smokehouse, and folks came from miles around to trade. They had a daughter with Gideon's quiet eyes and Rhetta's determination. She learned to walk between rows of barley and rode her first pony before she was 5. In the evenings, she sat in Rhetta's lap while Gideon read aloud from the old ledger books, his thumb marking the place as she asked endless questions. The house never grew large, but it was always warm. And the land, once burned and broken, held strong beneath their feet. The past never left them, not entirely. But it no longer hurt to remember, it only reminded them how far they'd come. And every night, when the lamps were turned low and the wind moved through the grass like a song, Rhetta would lie beside Gideon, her head tucked beneath his chin, and know with quiet certainty that the life they had built stone by stone, day by day, was exactly where they were meant to be. Together, always,